Well, good morning. Wanted to welcome everyone to our webinar this morning. I'm very excited to talk a little bit more about the Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative and some of the work that's being done relative to supporting the decisions districts make locally relative to curriculum and instructional materials. For those of you that are on the call and those that I haven't met, I'm Corey Epler. I'll be one of your hosts throughout this morning's webinar. As we get started, just a quick couple of reminders that we do have the chat box that you'll be able to use if you have any questions. And we will also be recording this webinar to be able to be posted at a later date for those that are not able to join us this morning. So like I mentioned, my name is Corey Epler, and my role here at the department is the academic officer and administrator for the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment. And I'm also excited to have Tricia Parker join us this morning. Tricia is the ELA content specialist for Ed Reports, and we'll talk a little bit more about her work and her role in this project a little bit later. So Tricia and I will be your host for this morning's session. So as we get started, I often use this slide as we talk a little bit about the work that's happening at the department. And it is a reminder of NDE's mission statement to lead and support the preparation of all Nebraskans for learning, earning, and living. And I think this is really important as we ground ourselves in this work and as we think about the conversation that we're having around instruction materials and the importance of it. It really is around supporting all Nebraskans and the opportunity that all of our students have for learning, earning, and living. One of the things that I might mention as well, if for those of you that were able to attend NDE Day at Administrator Days, is that the Commissioner rolled out several commitments to equity relative to the department's work. And specifically, one of our commitments to equity is around supporting and expanding access to high quality, standard aligned instruction materials, curricular resources, and professional development. And I think this is really important for us to consider because we know that high quality materials are an instrument of equity. And as we continue this work, we often are reminded that many of our students in our districts all don't have the same opportunity to learn from materials that are high quality and strongly aligned to state standards. So as we continue conversations about equity at the department, certainly instructional materials are a very important part of that conversation as well. Added to this, we continue to see in the research that materials are an equity issue, and that a 2015 study found that low-income students are less likely than high-income students to have quality content and materials in the classroom. And I think this quote from Dr. William Schmidt is just really resonates with me as we think about the role of materials in equity within our state. And I'm going to read it. It says, as it stands now, students' chances to learn challenging content depend upon whether they are lucky enough to attend a school that provides it. In effect, a defense of localism in questions about content amounts to a defense of inequality in an opportunity to learn. So I think what's being said here is that there's a lot of work to be done in our state relative to ensuring that all students in all schools in all situations are learning from the highest possible quality of materials that are strongly aligned to our state standards, and that anything less is essentially a defense of inequity within our system. So continuing this conversations, I really appreciate this umbrella of equity relative to the role that materials play in that as well. I might mention that this work is honors the local decision-making of school districts relative to instructional materials. So our goal through this work is not to mandate specific curriculum or instructional materials. And as you see on this slide, what's in the green at the bottom are things that are determined locally. However, the department does have a role to support districts in the selection and implementation of high-quality, standard-aligned instruction materials. Our hope is that this support can inform selection processes, it can inform professional learning, and just really ensuring that all learners are equipped with high quality materials in their classrooms, and that we have confidence in the alignment of those materials to state standards, and that teachers are also receiving professional learning to develop, or excuse me, receiving professional learning to implement those materials effectively. So this idea too that how do we support teachers to utilize the materials and really harness the creative energy and expertise of our teachers. So as we think about this particular quote, we know that materials support teachers and learners, but also it really allows teachers to focus their real and creative energy and expertise on unlocking the potential of the curriculum. So as we continue to think about the importance of curriculum, our hope is, and our intent is not to take away any of the creativity of our educators, but simply to allow them more time. So instead of spending so much time on searching for materials and thinking about how they augment materials that may not be strongly aligned, let's put the highest quality materials in front of our educators so that they can spend their time thinking about meeting the particular needs of the students they serve. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the constraints that our educators find relative to the materials being used a little bit later in this webinar. Recent research that's been coming out around instructional materials, and it's interesting because it's over the last couple of years that it seems that a larger attention has been placed on the materials that students are learning from. And I know that, you know, for example, Learning Forward, I went to a Learning Forward event with some colleagues from ESUs earlier this summer. And that whole professional learning event was on the importance of materials. And this research that you see on the screen comes from an organization called Chiefs for Change. And in 2017, they had a report come out that was called Hiding in Plain Sight: Leveraging Curriculum to Improve Student Learning. And what they were able to do is to look at different research reports, and they did a meta-analysis to investigate the impact of curriculum on student achievement. And that they found that the average effect size of the quality of materials was very, very high, and in fact, approaching the effect size of teaching quality. Even in this example of the meta-analysis, had a higher effect size than the student's own home and student's school. Now, I know that we could certainly debate the impact of a student's home and school on their quality of teaching and the materials, but this is just, again, one example of research that highlights the impact of materials relative to student performance. We'd be glad to send the link, and actually I can show you on our website where that report is linked from if you're interested in reading more specifically about the work that Chiefs for Change did. David Steiner is out of the Johns Hopkins Institute for Educational Policy, and he continues to be a leading advocate for instructional materials and curricula. And some of his work continues to highlight the differences of the cost of strong curricula. So thinking about that not always is the highest quality curriculum the most expensive one. And we think about the role of open resources and how OER continues to play an important part of this conversation. And then looking at the cost-effectiveness ratio of switching to higher quality curriculum was almost 40 times that of class size reduction. So when we start to think about ROI relative to materials, we know that certainly it's a cost-effectiveness strategy that ultimately supports student learning. I did mention the research, and there's a link down at the bottom of this slide that highlights additional resources around the importance of materials and some of the research that's been done on materials. And if any of you have additional resources that you'd love to share, that would be certainly welcome. I'd love to get those posted. Always looking for additional evidence-based strategies that support this work. So I think that as we look at where we're at in a materials market, some of the gaps are not just noticed by researchers, but they're also noticed by teachers. So teachers are people using the materials every day with their students, are really clear that if their materials are not aligned, that they would prioritize funding for high quality materials if given the choice. So some of the work from Ed Week found that only 18% of teachers nationwide strongly agree that their materials are aligned to standards. And that when teachers were asked what they would fund in terms of funding priorities, you see what's circled, high quality instruction materials and textbooks, even over their own salaries. So we continue to see that teachers indicate that materials are a funding priority for them. Now, this slide always gets somewhat of a reaction, because when we think about how time and resources are being spent. So in many districts, there is a very strong curriculum in place. I don't think any of us are naive to think that that's happening in every district. We know that in some districts, they haven't identified a core program or a curriculum, or that teachers are recognizing that the curriculum that's being used may not be as strongly aligned to the standards or the instructional shifts as needed to support student learning. So what we're finding is that teachers are going online to supplement or piece together curriculum. Now, again, this is national research, but I think it's really applicable to Nebraska too, that we know that teachers are spending about 12 hours per week creating materials. And that goes back to that quote earlier, where do we want teachers to spend their time? Do we want them to spend their time searching Google and Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers, or actually ensuring that they can spend time on implementing a high quality curriculum? I know, and I had never really heard of Teachers Pay Teachers, quite frankly, until a few years ago. But the national research is supporting that teachers are going onto Pinterest, and they're going to these places to find resources that may or may not be high quality, and it may or may not be aligned to state standards. So this too leads to our conversation about the role of open resources, and how we ultimately ensure that we can help minimize the time teachers spend searching for materials, and really helping them spend more time on the actual implementation and support for students in that particular context. We also know that material decisions can't happen in isolation, and so we think about the professional learning that we receive. And I know that NDE is, you know, we continue to do professional learning that may or may not be grounded in content. But the direction we're heading is to ensure that professional learning that's provided is rooted in the contents teachers teach in their classroom, and that professional learning is focused on the materials that are being used. And so, again, I know this is happening in many of our districts, and I use Eureka Math as an example quite frequently. That's an example of a high quality curriculum where we know that districts in Nebraska are using Eureka Math, and in some instances they're creating year-long PLCs on the implementation of that material. So moving beyond simply just instructional strategies, but really looking at are the materials educative? How are they supporting the content knowledge of our teachers? And how do they support creating engaging learning environments and strong instruction, something that all of our students absolutely deserve? So there are some common challenges as we look at the landscape around instruction materials. Number one, time and resources are limited. That's at a school level, that's at a district level, that's at an ESU level, that's at the state level. The other challenge that we have is, how do we support districts on supplementing materials that may be out of alignment? So I've had a lot of conversations with some district curriculum folks who, as we start to look at some of the independent reviews of the materials, they're recognizing that there are some issues with alignment. We're not asking districts to throw the baby out with the bathwater per se, but what we're wanting to do is highlight resources that would ultimately supplement the materials that were selected. I'll specifically mention Journeys and Wonders, and I'm going to share an opportunity towards the end of the webinar for districts that are using that set of materials. As we look at the independent reviews for Journeys and Wonders, there are some issues with alignment to ELA instructional shifts. We're not asking people to get rid of those materials. There are resources out there that were developed that actually would supplement and support implementation of those materials. So those types of considerations are certainly important as we think about the materials that our students are learning from. We know that there are a few curated and vetted sources of online lessons too, and as we continue to build Nebraska OER, we're starting to work on ensuring that both NDE and the ESU have an opportunity to approve resources as aligned to state standards. And I mentioned earlier just that disconnect between professional learning and instructional materials. Continuing to think about supporting the implementation of high quality materials through PLCs, not just within our own schools or in our own districts, but reaching across lines. I know there are examples of ESUs that are forming networked communities for districts that are using the same materials to really support them on the implementation of high quality materials. So all of that being said, and it's not all doom and gloom, I promise you today, we've got a plan. And this is something that is just so exciting as we think about the opportunity we have to ensure that all of our students have an opportunity to learn from high quality instructional materials. Many of you have heard me mention before that Nebraska is one of 8 states that were selected by CCSSO to participate in a network that is focused on increasing the capacity of our districts and schools to utilize and implement high quality standards aligned instruction materials. I don't want to minimize our selection, because if we look at the states that are a part of this network, we've got Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Delaware, Tennessee, Mississippi, New Mexico, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. These are states that are by and large unique, yet still have some similarities, but also states that have really identified and said materials are an equity issue. And so it's really, really exciting that Nebraska and our schools are being acknowledged around wanting to advance an equity conversation through the use of high quality materials. So it's certainly a fantastic opportunity. As part of this work, our core planning team has really outlined some expectations as our participation in this work unfolds. So number one, we want to see an increased use of instruction materials that are aligned to state standards and that are high quality. We hope to increase the percentage of teachers receiving professional development that improves their knowledge and ability to use standards-aligned instruction materials. And we're going to start a conversation too with teacher preparation programs. Those of you that are at the school level, you're living this when you work with beginning teachers, that they may or may not have had strong experience with the state standards or even materials. And so through the work with the Nebraska Council for Teacher Education, we hope that we continue to incentivize and encourage teacher prep programs to provide instruction on our state standards and materials into their programs, so that when they get to the school level, that they have a strong knowledge of those resources. So I mentioned one of the tools that we've created, and I'm holding the website just for a little bit. I know some of you may have already seen or heard about it, but one of the things, the resources that we've developed through this project is a website that highlights standards-aligned instruction materials and offers Nebraska-specific guidance documents to ensure that the materials meet the expectations of Nebraska's content standards. Now, I'm not telling anything you don't know, that Nebraska's in a national marketplace when it comes to materials. I haven't encountered a publisher yet who wants to develop materials for Nebraska only. What that means is that our districts and our teachers are trying to determine the alignment of a set of materials to the Nebraska standards. In many instances, a publisher may indicate alignment to the Common Core, but they're probably not as they might not be able to, with confidence, indicate the alignment to the Nebraska state standards. Now, I'm not saying that not all publishers can, but I'm just, the conversations that I've heard from districts is that sometimes that part of the conversation isn't as strong as they want it to be. So through this website, what it includes, first of all, it includes the independent reviews of materials for English language arts and mathematics is provided by Ed Reports. And we're going to talk a little bit about why Ed Reports here in just a minute, because I've gotten a lot of questions about that. Currently, Ed Reports has only reviewed English language arts and mathematics. They have plans to review science. They have plans to review programs for foundational skills, as well as interim assessment reviews. Those should be coming after the first of the year. The other thing that's going to be really important on this website are what I'm calling guidance documents to ensure alignment to Nebraska's college and career ready standards for ELA and math. So that isn't quite up on the website yet. We're close to that, but I did want to mention that what we hope to provide are bridge documents, as I'm calling them, that would really ensure with confidence that the materials meet the expectations for alignment to Nebraska standards. So Ed Report reviews are to the Common Core state standards. While we recognize there are some similarities in our content from our standards to Common Core, we want to be really intentional and explicit to ensure that there are resources that would allow a district or a school or an administrator, an educator to feel good about the alignment of the materials they're selecting to Nebraska standards. The other thing that's on our website currently, we've got suggested steps if you're starting an ELA or math material selection process. Science will be coming soon. And we have a lot of additional resources that are already on the website, but we continue to add to as well. Actually, we brought together a group of educators in June for 2 days to help us create these steps. We had educators from local districts, we had ESUs, we had folks from higher education in the room as well. I see a big group from ESU 3. I know we had at least 2 folks from ESU 3 staff that were part of our smaller group working on this. And then the other thing is that we had a lot of districts who were volunteering their resources that they use. I'm going to pick on Millard. I'm not sure if anyone from Millard is on or at the ESU 3 meeting, but Millard provided part of their policy document around their selection process. Millard also provided for science an assessment that they would use with their educators to determine their readiness to implement materials or begin that process. I had a call from administrator at Columbus Lakeview this last week who sent me his selection process timeline. So I hope to gather more of that to be able to share with districts, because while some districts have a really clearly defined process, we're finding that not many do. And sometimes it's just simply a matter of, we've got money, so we're going to adopt, and we have 3 months, let's go. But what we're hoping to provide is just some stronger support that would allow a district to be purposeful and intentional around the materials that they select, and ensuring that the alignment is there. I think that's something that's really critically important. So the website, what it does not include, it does not include mandated or required materials. I'll let Tricia talk about the Ed Reports process in just a minute. There aren't reviews on the website for any materials that are not comprehensive in nature. So if you look at Ed Reports and the curriculum that you're using is not on there, what that means is that Ed Reports has determined it's not a comprehensive set of materials. And if you have questions about that process, Tricia would be the best one to connect with. It doesn't include suggestions for how to teach it or even time allotments for implementation, because we recognize that's so specific to the district. So while there are some things that are on there, again, we're just wanting to make sure that you know, communicating that it's not a mandate to use a particular set of materials. We want districts to move towards the highest quality set of materials. You know, as you start to look at the reviews and you're like, oh gosh, something that we're using is rated poorly or not strongly rated, there may be resources to support to supplementing that. Or there may not be. And so I think part of that continues the conversation around how do we ensure that all kids get the opportunity to learn from the highest quality materials. I've gotten this question a lot, and I'm going to turn it over to Tricia here in just a second. But why use Ed Reports? We chose to use Ed Reports for a couple of reasons, and Tricia will talk more about their process. Number one is that they have developed a very extensive process that is very thorough. The other reason that we really liked Ed Reports is because they use educators to complete their reviews. And Nebraska is a state that uses educators to write standards, to develop and write assessment items. And so we really appreciated the fact that Ed Reports uses educators to complete their reviews. And some of our Nebraska educators, a couple who you'll hear from in just a little bit, are actually reviewing for Ed Reports in addition to their day job. But it's a very comprehensive process. And quite frankly, when we started this work, you know, we actually kind of toyed with the idea, could we review these materials using Nebraska teachers? And that's what we wanted to do. But then when we started to look at the fiscal impact of that, the human capacity aspect of that, but also the fact that something already exists, we would be recreating the wheel to a certain extent. So it's really exciting to think about that this tool exists out there, and something we think that will definitely benefit our schools and our students. So Tricia, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about Ed Reports. And I know logistically we had talked about you driving. I'll drive the PowerPoint if that's okay with you.
That's just fine with me. I think you've proven to be a competent driver. All right, and I will apologize. Apparently there's something going on in my neighborhood, so you may hear some dogs in the background. Thank you for joining us today. I want to talk to you a little bit about how Ed Reports works and what our theory of action is, and also a little bit about the impact that our reports have had so far. We believe at Ed Reports that it's important to identify excellence. So as Corey said, we've looked at a variety of comprehensive programs. We do have more that are coming, so if you don't see one on the website that is a comprehensive mathematics, ELA, or science program, let us know. We're happy to take a look at those programs and see about acquiring them for a review. So what we do is we look at programs, we lift up the good things that are in those programs, we identify the places where perhaps there's a departure from standards or where the quality of the program isn't in alignment with our tool. And we publish those reports out for the world to use and to freely use. There's no charge for our reports. We believe that by showing schools what high quality materials look like, this increases the demand for excellence. And as this occurs, we find that materials are improved. To date, we have 19 publishers that have changed their materials as a result of Ed Reports reviews, and we're very, very proud of that. The other thing that we're very proud of is that this produces better outcomes for students. We've been doing some research, and to date, our reach has extended. We have affected about 1.5 million students at this point. And Ed Reports is a fairly young organization, so we're excited to be able to have that kind of reach and that kind of impact. But the thing that is exciting is that we do this using educators. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the Ed Reports review process and how that works. As Corey mentioned, we had talked with the Nebraska Department of Education about the idea of Nebraska doing their own reviews. And the longer that I was with Ed Reports and saw the process, was a part of the process and learned it, the more I realized that this is such an extensive process that it would be something that it might not be a good use of time and monies to replicate what's done by the Ed Reports reviewers. So to just give you an idea, our review teams participate in training. We have a training that occurs every summer, and then we also have a digital training that is available to our reviewers. And so we have reviewers that are placed in teams. They participate in the trainings, and at the beginning of a review, the publisher will present an orientation to show the components of the program, to talk about research frameworks and so on, to help acquaint them with the program. Then the reviewers look at the materials independently. They gather evidence using our tool and evidence guides, which are available on edreports.org. Then they come together weekly to share that evidence with their teammates, to talk about what they found in the materials, and to come to consensus about ratings on the materials. We estimate that our reviewers spend anywhere from 5 to 10 hours a week gathering evidence, writing up their personal reports, and then coming together for an hour each week to discuss. And those review processes usually take about 12 to 16 weeks, and then as the report wraps up, then we check back with those teams if there's any questions after the Ed Reports internal team reviews those reports. The team facilitators and writers also meet weekly or bi-weekly to ensure that we have consistency. We also work in an ongoing manner to train those individuals and to make sure that we're gathering consistent information and to make sure that we're being very clear about what we're finding in the materials. So once the reviews are ready, we share those back with the publisher. The publishers have an opportunity to say, hey, you guys didn't quite get this right, or we'd like to talk to you about this set of materials. We think that maybe you missed something. Give them an opportunity to respond. And then usually within 3 weeks to a month, those reports are published. The opportunity is available for all publishers to create a publisher response. So as you look at the Ed Reports website, you can see the places where the publishers have responded. Oftentimes they will talk about how the philosophy of their program perhaps differs from Ed Reports, or where they agree with our methodology and the findings within the reviews. But the thing that really drives our reviews that is so important, and it's part of, I'll be really honest, part of what attracted me to this position, was the idea that we value educators. Ed Reports is by educators for educators. We have 5 review team members that are on each team. In fact, we have folks on this call right now who are Ed Reports reviewers. I was able to get some Nebraska folks involved, and one of the things that has consistently risen to the top in terms of comments from my teammates and from others is the quality of our Nebraska teachers and the fact that they have been involved in stuff at the state level, at the district level, and that our teachers really understand materials, understand pedagogy, and that we've had some really great reviewers, so I'm really proud of that. Question from Katie Ramsey: is the science review tool based on 3-dimensional learning and phenomena? And oh, I see Corey's got an answer for you there. So Katie, if you want some more questions or want to ask some more questions also of Sam Shaw, let us know and we're happy to get you in touch with him. All right, so we have educators that come from diverse roles. They are all different grade levels. We have principals, we have folks from ESUs and other like organizations from other states. And presently we have more than 200 reviewers from across 46 states. The thing that's important to us is that last bullet point, that we have over 150 hours of review time per reviewer in series. And sometimes I'd say that's even a low estimate. So I want to hear from a couple of our reviewers and a couple of the folks who have been involved in some of our work with the Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative. So it's my pleasure to introduce Tyler Cronin. Tyler is the Teaching and Learning Coordinator at ESU 16. Thanks for joining us, Tyler.
Hi, hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we also have Betsy Tonagis. Betsy is a Nebraska teacher, administrator, educator. She's done all kinds of different things. She's a national board certified teacher, and we are excited to have her as well doing reviews for us. So Betsy, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I am going to ask Tyler and Betsy a couple of questions. And so the first question we have is, and we'll start, Betsy, we'll let you start. So talk to us about the kind of work that you do and how you would incorporate learnings either from the reviews or from the Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative into your work in education.
Sure. I had the privilege of working on the Nebraska ELA standards a few years ago, actually now, and using the reports. There's a couple different ways you can use them if you're an administrator or someone who's in charge of determining curriculum. So as your district begins to think about the adoption process and you're considering curriculum companies, Edie Reports serves as kind of a sounding board to assess whether the curriculum you're considering meets state standards, what your community expects, what your teachers need, and whether there's a high usability for teachers who will be the ones implementing it, as you can see on some of the reports with Gateway 3. The reports also open your eyes to new curriculum that you'd maybe like to explore to see if it meets the needs of your students, teachers, and community. And just in the last couple of weeks, I've had conversations with 2 districts who, after exploring the reports, noticed that there were companies or materials that they'd never even heard of that produce high quality materials, and they wanted to know more about them. So they were actually adding those either materials or those companies to kind of a short list of points to contact as they were thinking about implementing and adopting over the next few years. If you already have materials in place and are not planning on an adoption soon, the reports provide valuable information about the strengths and weaknesses of materials. I know so often I've been in districts where we have gone through materials and we have teachers pining through page after page looking for standards. And the Edie Reports, while they are a complete comprehensive look at that, and your teachers are more than welcome, obviously, to go back through and look for specific things. It just saves a lot of time and training of those teachers where they could use their time elsewhere. So they're especially important to think about as you think about the K-12 alignment and supplemental supports you may need to balance some of the areas where there may be a perceived weakness. They'll also help you develop a cohesive plan in addressing areas that are not as strong. And based upon that, you'd be able to see areas of professional development that should be a priority for your district.
Great. Thanks, Betsy.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler, same question. How would you use these materials in your work?
You know, we've worked with a lot of districts here at ESU 16 that are going through different adoption processes through ELA or math. I'm working mostly with a district in math right now. And just like Betsy kind of stated before, is they started with a list of possible curriculum that they've heard of. They kind of asked their neighbors about what they're using and if it's working or not. And then they just by chance heard about Edie Reports. And so they went on there and saw it. And they discovered some new publishers that they would have never considered, not because they're not good, but because they've never heard of them before. And they're not being used in any districts close to them or in the vicinity. So just like Betsy was saying, it opens up this new can of there's so many more possibilities out there, and we don't have to be stuck in this area of we're going to be using what Nebraska schools have always used because that's who we're getting our data from. We can go to a much larger audience, a national audience, saying what's working for kids, what's not, and then take that information back and say, is that going to work for our own districts? Is that going to work for our kids?
Great. Thanks, Tyler. So, Betsy, why do you believe in the work of the Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative, and how do you think it could impact students in Nebraska schools?
So one thing I always hear, one thing that's in discussion is what can we take off of our teachers' plates? How can we decrease the amount of time that teachers put in weekly planning and developing and assessing? And if we can provide our teachers with high quality materials, I think that's a win-win for everybody. It decreases the amount of time teachers are spending seeking those outside resources to supplement what they believe the materials are lacking. And as you saw earlier, those supplemental materials are not always research-based and can be out of alignment. And it also creates consistency among a district. If everybody is using the same high-quality materials, there's not the need for people to feel like they need to be supplementing. Also, as an added benefit, it would free up time for teachers to continue to refine their teaching craft and focus on just really good, solid instruction and teaching. And it's also a win for our students because we're ultimately leveling the playing field for students across the state of Nebraska, as they're all able to engage with high quality materials that teachers feel confident in teaching.
Thank you. Tyler, same question. Why do you believe in the work of the Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative, and how do you think it'll impact students in Nebraska?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is an equity issue that we have in Nebraska, where we have very small districts, we have very large districts, and I don't think students are getting the same access to the high quality materials that are out there. As a former high school math teacher, I saw that what I knew as best practice in a math classroom was not aligning to what my curriculum was saying. And just because my curriculum said it was standards aligned, it didn't necessarily mean that it was. So that made me really frustrated as a teacher, and it made me want better stuff. And what I had to do was kind of what Betsy was saying, is I had to go look for it myself. And when we actually started an adoption process as I was leaving the district, and we kind of talked about what would work best. And we looked at, like I said, we looked at the schools around us, what were they using and what was working for them. And I think the biggest problem with that is that they're just using what's around them. And so it's just kind of a vicious cycle of we're just using what our neighbors down the road are using. And so I learned about Ed Reports about 2 months after we did that adoption cycle, just outside of that. And it would have been nice to have that tool to take to my administration and say, look, these materials are not so great. And here's a bunch of other ones that might help us in our scores and with our learning for our students.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very easy to look down the road, but if all we're seeing is a certain set of materials, it's really easy to get caught up in that. Totally get it. The other thing that made me laugh that you said, Tyler, is the fact that we get materials that say they're aligned, but what does that really mean for Nebraska students? And so it's really great to be able to be intentional about that, and I'm really glad that NDE has taken that on. All right, one last question. Betsy has reviewed for a few rounds now and done some special projects for us in terms of helping with report cleanup and so on. And Tyler is in his first round, correct? Are you guys done yet, Tyler?
I actually was not put on a team for this
Not yet.
semester. Yeah, so I'll be starting after Christmas.
Okay, so Tyler got the training.
Yep.
So regardless, though, these are the two of the folks that have chosen to review for us. So, Betsy, tell us why you chose to be an Ed Reports reviewer.
I chose to be an Ed Reports reviewer just because, so often you see curriculum and it comes all packaged nice and neat and it comes with everything that you need. But there were often times where I wondered if it really met the needs of the standards and the students that I was serving. And so I wanted to dive a little bit deeper in terms of what resources teachers were actually utilizing to help companies create better programming for teachers to increase student achievement. Working in some lower income schools, I know that is of high importance with high quality materials. And so if there is a way that I can contribute my skills to improving materials for teachers, that of course improves outcomes for students.
Tyler, same question.
Yeah, one of the things that I always think about is this is a national organization, and I think that sometimes we look at ourselves as Nebraska and we don't have the Common Core, and so we don't necessarily get involved in a lot of national things. But I think having a Nebraska voice on a national project like this is really good. And I think that when I talk to districts about it and I say it's not just people from the coast. It's not just California people. It's not just, New York people. There's Nebraska educators on this, and I'm one of them. No, I talk about, you can get involved in this. There's so many ways that Nebraska's voice can be heard in these reports. So that was one of the reasons why I decided to get on Ed Reports. The other reason is I go to a lot of conferences through NCTM and NATM and for science now, and I learn a lot of awesome stuff. And I want to take that knowledge beyond just the classroom and take it to a national platform of where you can serve those best practices and see them in the books you're reviewing, in the curriculum that you are reviewing. So I think those are the two main reasons that I got involved in Ed Reports.
Well, Tyler and Betsy, thank you so much for joining us and for letting me put you on the spot today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to put a couple other people on the spot really quickly. I have a couple of more of my Ed Reports colleagues on the phone with us today, or on the Zoom call with us. Tim Truitt is our high school mathematics specialist at Ed Reports. And then Shanna Estep was on here earlier. I think she may have had to take another call. And Shanna is our outreach specialist. So if you have questions that are specific to science, mathematics, ELA, generally how Ed Reports works, or any other kinds of questions, please feel free to reach out and I will get you in touch with the right people if I can't answer your question or if I'm not the right person to answer your question. So I think that's about it. Corey, I'm going to hand back off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tricia, and thanks, Tyler and Betsy. I did put in a note. I had a chat sent to me that they are still looking for science reviewers, and I know I pushed that out over my Twitter a few weeks ago, and I know Sarah Cooper did too, because I think Tyler's point is really good that it's helpful for us as a state when we have Nebraska educators participate in these opportunities. So if you have an awesome science teacher, and to Katie's point about three-dimensional materials and basing it in phenomena, let's have a voice in the room. So it is a lot of time, but certainly it benefits not only the individual, but their school and their students as well. So I mentioned the website, and the address is up there. It's nematerialsmatter.org. And again, as you look at this website, you'll notice that we've linked to the, for ELA and math, it's linked to the Ed Report reviews. So we use the same green, yellow, and red indicator that Ed Reports does. And what you find on our website is pretty surface, I would say. To dig deeper into the alignment pieces, you'll want to link back to the Ed Reports website. One thing that I mentioned that is not up there yet, that should be up there hopefully within a couple of weeks, is that critical bridge document. How do we go from Common Core reviews of materials that are aligned to Common Core to review of materials to ensuring alignment to Nebraska standards? So if you click on the ELA and Math tab, you'll see selection process guidance. We've kind of just outlined some broad steps that districts might consider. We put in some links. There's a toolkit with resources. We continue to build that if you think of additional things that would be helpful. The other thing I keep thinking about is from a policy perspective, because we know that some districts have very clear policies in place around selection of materials. Many do not. So I'm hopeful that we can utilize some of the great resources that are out there that our districts have created, and just be able to help others as well. So again, you're welcome to check out the website, take a look at the ELA and math reviews. As new Ed Report reviews come out, our website is updated automatically. So once the science reviews are up there, they will be automatically linked. And again, like Tricia said, hopefully that's after the first of the year. One of the things I tend to try to be a pretty big systems person too. So thinking about how do we anchor this work within the system. So I wanted to give just a few things that many of you are aware of, but just reminders. So prior to last year, we had never asked districts to submit who their district curriculum contacts are. So we did it last year via a Qualtrics survey. We had about 75% of the districts respond. This year, it's a data submission via the NDE portal, where we've asked districts and ESUs to identify their elementary, middle, and high school curriculum contact. This is the person that I'm going to reach out to first relative to things related to standards, related to materials, related to instruction. Nothing against any superintendents that are on, but I recognize that by sending emails of that information to superintendents, it's just one additional email they would have to forward over. So we're working to identify who that curriculum contact is. We want to continue to get a better sense of what's being used for K-12 math and ELA as far as materials. Our ESUs helped us last year, and we've got, I would say, about data from about 50% of districts of what's being used. Within the next week, there will be a Qualtrics survey that is sent to the district curriculum contacts, where we are specifically asking you to share what you're using for K-12 ELA and math. And we've broken it into grade bands, so K-5, 6-8, and 9-12. And again, this is just data for us to help inform not only our professional learning, but there was an email that came out over the literacy cadre a few weeks ago about wanting to know if any districts were using CKLA for English Language Arts, and that's data that we don't have. And our hope is that if we have that data, that we can connect districts that are using similar materials and continue to think about how we might work more collaboratively, but also just maximize our resources. We hope to continue to create resources to highlight those materials. And then, you know, down the road too, we want to really try to coordinate a strategy and more of a pilot. So we're going to be asking for districts or ESUs to volunteer to be a part of a statewide professional development network on high quality materials. So if I'm going to use Wit and Wisdom as an ELA example. So if there were, let's say, 5 or 7 districts that were wanting to use Wit and Wisdom or were using it, we could coordinate a statewide professional learning network, utilize some state resources to really bring in some of the experts that would actually provide that training. I get a lot of questions about Eureka Math, same type of thing. If we had 10 to 12 districts that were using Eureka Math, could we facilitate some type of network that would support implementation of those materials and support for teachers and support for administrators? So that's kind of part of this longer term vision, is to really increase collaboration. And something like that could even be within an ESU. So I think about Tyler and Allison at ESU 16 and some of the work that they're doing, where they're actually bringing schools together that are using similar sets of materials. And we think that's a really strong model that supports implementation of high quality materials in our districts. So those are a few things that we hope might anchor this work within the system. So, you know, as we start to wrap up, you know, we continue to think about this as a support mechanism. And as you think more about this and talk more about it, I would love to hear what kind of supports would be most helpful to you as districts when selecting materials. Would it be helpful to have model policies around instructional material selection, or example timelines? Or, you know, we talk about districts that may not have a year and a half to work through a process. Maybe they've got 3 months. What would that look like? If you have ideas, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you around the additional supports. And thinking about how do we engage the community? How do we engage parents? Those are also critical things that we continue to ask ourselves. Before I talk just about a couple opportunities that are coming up, I love this quote from the CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools, and it gets us back to this idea of equity. And if we want to ensure that all students, no matter their zip code, family income, or background, get what they need to be successful, we must take a far more thoughtful approach to curriculum, the actual content that kids learn in school. So really thinking about all students and ensuring that all students have that opportunity to learn from the highest possible materials. A couple of things that you might be interested in. So I mentioned support for districts using Journeys and Wonders for ELA. November 27th and 28th at ESU 3, we're going to be working with student achievement partners. They've developed some supplementary resources for those that are using Journeys and Wonders. That's going to be, unfortunately, we have to cap at about 50. So there'll be more information coming out about that. That training is really going to be designed for, I would say, administrators, instructional coaches, department heads, lead teachers, ESU staff, not necessarily focusing on teachers, but thinking about the leaders that support implementation. So I've got it reserved at ESU 3. Thanks, Julie, for connecting me with your people. The training will be free. So we're not going to be able to cover expenses as far as mileage, but you know, we want to get folks there that have an interest in that. If that goes over well and there's still demand, there's also a possibility of maybe doing that a second time. We could even think about doing that further west too. We've got 3 dates in mind in February where we're going to dig deeper into the Ed Report reviews. So I know that there's still a lot of questions about how do you use these reviews from Ed Reports? What should I do relative to getting my educators to use them? So we're going to have 3 sites, East, Central, and West. Shooting for February 2018, looking at a day-long training and thinking about the idea of how do you use these reports and the resources on the Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative. So stay tuned. I will communicate with our ESU staff. I'll communicate with our curriculum contacts and of course on social media, all of that good stuff as well. I'm going to put up contact information as I'm looking at, we have about a minute left. If you have questions about the Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative, send me an email. If you have specific questions about Ed Reports, you can shoot Tricia an email, and then the 2 websites that are up there are our Any Materials Matter website as well as the Ed Reports website as well. More than anything, I want to continue to say thanks for the great work that you do for kids and the opportunities that we have to just continue to enhance the great work that we're doing. And we think this is one support that will hopefully do that as well. So if you have questions, again, shoot me an email. And otherwise, we thank you for taking time. We'll archive this and we'll put this on the NIMC website for those that may not have gotten to join us today. So with that, I say we are adjourned. Thank you. I see some folks waving.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.